song before the lesson will be 676. 676. Let's sing. There's within my heart a melody. Jesus whispers sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee, peace be still. In all of life ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. Soon he's coming back to welcome me, far beyond the starry sky. I shall wing my flight to worlds unknown. I shall live with him on high. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go.
Thank you very much, Nick, for great song leading. Jonathan, appreciate the prayer. Appreciate each of you being here today. We had a great day yesterday, and again, Jonathan will be giving us some more information on that a little later. But, for our first youth day, I think it was great. The singing was great. Messages were great. The camaraderie was great, and we did not run out of food. And so it was fantastic. Hopefully on the next one, we'll have more of our own members here as well. Even some of our younger folks, maybe. Get everybody involved in this family youth day, so to speak. But again, I appreciate each and every one of you being here. The following is an article or a letter that was published in one of the state newspapers. On a flight from Seattle, Washington to Minneapolis, Minnesota, a white female was seated next to an African-American male. During the flight, a conversation was initiated, which ultimately led to him discovering that she lived in Mississippi. At that point, he began to verbally chastise her for living in the most racist state in the nation. The fact that she was white and that she chose to live in Mississippi was enough proof for him to label and accuse her of being a racist. Rather than further inflame an already very agitated individual, the lady simply said, "Everyone in Mississippi is not a racist," and she ended the conversation. If this man would have taken the time to find out something about this lady sitting next to him, it might have assisted him in ridding his heart of a consuming, burning hatred that had been obviously consuming him over many years. Maybe knowledge of the fact that this white lady from Mississippi within the last 3 years had personally assisted in the building of a home for a handicapped African-American man, and had also personally assisted remodeling and completely refurnishing a home for an elderly African-American lady. Maybe that would have made the difference in his attitude. Maybe the fact that over the last 12 years, the involvement of this particular white lady in improving the living conditions of several other African-American families within the Delta would have changed his thinking regarding whites in Mississippi. But then maybe the fact that this same white female and her husband had African Americans as overnight guests in their home on numerous occasions would have caused him to pause in his racist rant. Then just maybe the consideration of the fact that this white lady had recently hosted birthday parties for two different African American young people in her home. Or then maybe the fact that this white lady had sat next to African Americans in church services, or had eaten at the same dinner table and had on many occasions actually served African Americans at her dinner table, would have caused this man to realize the error of his thinking. In reality, if this white lady from Mississippi had really been a racist, she probably wouldn't have been sitting next to an African American on a long plane flight. She would have asked for a change of seats. The letter goes on to state, I know there are racists on both sides of the aisle in every state, just as I know there are agitators among the races who continually stoke the flames of hatred and discontent among us. In this situation, an African American was verbally condemning racism while actively and forcefully engaging in it himself. However, particularly in this instance, my lovely Christian daughter-in-law was certainly not deserving of these false accusations and such discourtesy. Signed, Norman J. Maranto, Rolling Fork, Mississippi. This episode occurred when Leslie Derrick's wife was flying back from Washington, back home. And it's just something that many of us and others have had to endure. All of us are no strangers, all right, to the shortcomings of individuals in regards to certain prejudices and racism. Within our state, the history of race relations has not been very pretty at all. I was raised in the Delta of Mississippi, where right now the population is about 75% African American to 25% white. Some of us actually lived through the 50s and 60s when schools were first integrated, when busing was actually forced upon us, and there was a lot of animosity in the air. Many of you probably don't know this, but one of our members in this particular congregation, their dad was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So all of us, this hits home, okay, to many more of us than we might think. During the riots at Jackson State University back in 1969 and 1970, I was in Jackson at the time at Belhaven College, and our athletic teams there at Belhaven at the time were the Klansmen, okay? Now, not with the K, but with the C, the Scottish Klan, not the cross-burning K, so to speak. However, attempting to explain this difference to a lot of people, it just didn't make any difference, really. And I had to go through that period of time, and particularly when we had to go over to Jackson State. It was kind of a tough situation there, but we played through it, okay? Now, one of the things I have found out over my lifetime is that racism and prejudices, not limited to a white/black issue only. I've done lots of traveling out in the northwest part of our state, and I found in Idaho there's a very, very similar prejudice/racism atmosphere between whites and the Nez Perce Indians, those Indians that lived there back when Lewis and Clark came through. Over in San Francisco, there's a white/Chinese problem that exists. In Texas, a white/Mexican issue. In the late 1800s and early 1900s in the Delta, there was a white/Italian issue, just like the African American/white issue today. I do believe we've made many strides in race relations within Mississippi and really within our nation. But we all know that there still remains a great divide in this. Now, add to that divide that exists, it seems like today there's just a whole lot more groups, all right? There's much more division because there's many more groups today than we had back then. Division at times, it seems, exists with pure hatred, okay? Pure hatred of the other. These individuals can't agree whether it's night and day. Words are twisted, taken out of context. Many times they resort to name calling. Families are attacked within these divisions that we have today. Whether it's Democrats, Republicans, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-NRA, pro-gun control, Antifa versus Patriots, USA Patriots, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, free speech, safe zones, you name the issue, and we have the groups. And there's a divide, okay? There's a divide. And when we take issues nowadays, it seems, when we take stands on our issues, we become enemies. We can't agree to disagree nowadays, it seems. It seems it's that person now is out to destroy you, or really not even destroy you. It's out to destroy your family, destroy your livelihood, destroy your business, whatever it is. Whatever it is. And within the entire world, divisions exist between peoples of nations. For instance, the one we hear about nowadays a lot would be the Jewish/Palestinian issue, or either Syrian and the Jewish state, or even the United States and Iran, others. It's just major divisions. Within the Bible, a major faction we hear about is the Jewish/Samaritan coexistence. And that's going to be our lesson today, talking about that for just a little bit. But within the Old Testament history, if you'll remember, the United Kingdom of Israel split into the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called Judah. And the nation of Israel, of the northern kingdom, was taken captive by the Assyrians. And the southern kingdom, Judah, was defeated by Babylonia. And the vast majority of the Hebrew population was taken into captivity. Now the Assyrians resettled some of their own citizens there in their country back into the land there in Israel. Now over time, the Jews that were left and the Assyrians and others that were resettled there, they intermarried. All right. And this mixed blood, not 100% Jewish, not 100% Assyrian, gave rise to a group of people known as the Samaritans. They occupied basically the landmass between the northern Israel and the southern Judea. And so kind of between Galilee and Judea there. Now, some 70 years later, all right, when the Jews were coming back from captivity, they were starting to filter in, and they started rebuilding the temple, and the Samaritans reached out at that time first to help. Can we help? No, they were totally rejected, all right, because of that deep-seated resentment. And so the relations between the Jews and the Samaritans just went down, and it stayed down, so to speak. And even John 8:48, where the New Testament makes no attempt to try to hide the immense hostility there, irreconcilable differences came up. And the Samaritans there in John 8:48 was accused of actually possessing a demon, every one of them. And so, do you not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? And so this is just kind of the relationship that was developed there. Look there in Luke 9, back in Luke 9, verse 52, we'll see that Jesus couldn't even get any help from the Samaritans. 9:52, when Jesus was going to Jerusalem to be tried and executed, there in 52, that's Jesus, sent messengers ahead of him, and they went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him. And they did not receive him. Who's the him there? Jesus. They did not receive Jesus because he was journeying with his face toward Jerusalem. The Samaritans wouldn't even acknowledge Jesus and help at that time. And that's how bad it had gotten. But now the one that you will remember a lot will be probably John 4:9, where it specifically tells us of that hatred. John 4:9 says, the Samaritan woman therefore said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. You see the hatred there? I mean, it's a deep-seated hatred. And it's one that should have been taken care of years ago, but it wasn't. But this particular parable right here, or this particular story, starts the transition, I think, of thinking right, all right? And it should serve for us to get our thinking right, if it's not already. Jesus died for all of us. He didn't just come to earth, go through what he did, just for those of us who are members of the Church of Christ. He died for the whole world. And his desire was for them to obey him and become a member of his church, the Church of Christ. He founded it. He started it. He initiated it. He said he was going to build it, and he did. And he wants everybody, not just the white people in Mississippi, not just the black people in Mississippi. The church is not a club, all right? It's the family of God. And God made everybody, Mexicans, the Chinese, whatever, and it should be our desire for the whole church to come together. And this particular story, I think, hits at that really well. Although many people fail to understand the bottom line, genuine meaning that Jesus is trying to convey. Now, so let's look at that this morning, and let's start reading there in Luke 10, 25. Luke 10, 25. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is it written in the law? How does it read to you? And he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied, A certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. And by chance a certain priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But when a certain Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion, and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I return, I will repay you." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, "The one who showed mercy toward him." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Because of this story that we call the Good Samaritan, because of this story, hospitals, have been built and given the name Good Samaritan. Because of this story, there's an association that has been named the Samaritan's Purse, And if you'll look across the nation, there will be many organizations with this Good Samaritan title. The Good Samaritan laws have been passed in some of our states regarding the assistance of travelers to help people, in time of need while they're traveling along the road or wherever. And many times the idea and teaching within this parable is the willingness of one person, to help another person, to help that person who is in trouble. That's the reason the hospital, so to speak, and the Samaritan's Purse is helping. All of this deals with helping people. And so the gist of this particular story here, from some viewpoints, seem to be, hey, it's good to help somebody. That's what the Samaritan did. The Samaritan stopped and helped. While that's part of it, I'm going to try to shake you a little bit and ask you if you believe that is the main point, the main teaching of this particular verse here, or of these verses. Because I suggest to you this morning that helping and being the person who assists, that is not the main teaching here in this story. I propose to you this morning that there's another lesson that we can determine in this that I think is really the lesson that Jesus is telling them about. There, when the lawyer stands up and we're told that he's to test Jesus. Yeah, the lawyer is that person who knows a lot about the scripture, And his question was really similar to another one, to the rich young ruler that we've read about in another part of the Bible. Love God, love your neighbor. All right. We got to remember now that's the law that they were living under at that time. We didn't have the new law yet; it hadn't come in. So that's basically the law. Love your God, love your neighbor, and you shall have life. You shall be saved. And so the lawyer said, "Yeah, you're right, absolutely right." But then he asked this question, and I think this is the point of this lesson here. He asked, "Who is my neighbor?" All right, that's the question that's asked in this story. Now, while it's nice, for the Samaritan to assist it, the question is, who is my neighbor? Now, so this man, that certain man is going down this lonely road, they say 20 miles or so of just rocks and bad terrain where robbers are, where lots of dangers exist. And this person is going down that road. And he was robbed, basically. Probably beaten up. And left to die. Left to die. 2 people came by and did nothing. These 2 people should have been the ones to actually have stopped. But they didn't. They didn't. One was actually a priest who would have been offering the sacrifices. One was actually a Levite who would have been helping within the temple area. All right? 2 people who were definitely religious-minded, or should have been religious-minded, they came by and kept on walking. 2 people who were definitely religious-minded, or should have been religious-minded, they came by and kept on walking. 2 people who were definitely religious-minded, or should have been religious-minded, they came by and kept on walking. 2 people who were definitely religious-minded, or should have been religious-minded, they came by And then this Samaritan came by. Now, how do you think that lawyer felt when Jesus used the term Samaritan? Remember how the hatred was. The lawyer knew that the hatred was there between the Samaritan and the Hebrew, the Israelite, or really anybody, basically, except Samaritans. A Samaritan came by and stopped. That should have been the last person that would have stopped. But the Samaritan stopped. Not only stopped, wow, look what he did. Bandaged the wounds, takes him to an inn, a nice place that he could get some rest and recover, pays for it, tells the innkeeper, I'll pay some more on my way back, just let me know. This was a Samaritan doing this. There's the point that we've got to understand. Relations between the two didn't gee-haw very well, so to speak. Yet this person was reaching out. And he posed the question, which of the three proved to be a neighbor? And the lawyer said, he who showed mercy. He who showed mercy toward him. The lawyer couldn't even say the word Samaritan. Who's my neighbor? Oh, the Samaritan was. No, I can't either. That's a dirty word. I'm not going to say Samaritan. I'm going to say the one who showed mercy. That's his neighbor. Jesus just taught this group of people who their neighbors really were. We always think of a neighbor who, you know, my next door neighbor, or the neighbor across the street, or down the street, or the neighbor in my neighborhood, or, you know, somebody who's living close to them. We think those individuals are our neighbors. We may even extend it to the school that we might attend or something to be our neighbors. Anybody who's got a likeness with us, we may call our neighbors. You see, this is the whole point, though, of this lesson. Who is our neighbor? Jesus has just taught what it means. And who is our neighbor? He put the issue to rest by saying the Samaritan. The Samaritan is your neighbor. The Samaritans are a different race, a different nationality, different religion. There was animosity between them, basically considered as enemies. But the Samaritan was helping the person in need. That's your neighbor. What? You gotta be kidding me. This is my bitter sworn enemy. Jesus said, that's the neighbor. That's your neighbor. More so even than the priest and the Levite. You know, they should have been the one to help. They studied about it, supposedly. They talked about it, supposedly, about what they should do to help people and to do for people. And they're out living their lives, okay, and they ran across this situation, but chose not to get involved. They basically separated their religious life from the life that they were living. And I propose to you this morning that if we do that, we will fail. We have to live our religious convictions and our spirituality within the lives that we have. And we carry that with us when we go out into the world. And we can't separate these two from each other. And that's exactly what the priest and Levite had done. They separated their spiritual training. They separated their love for God. And so they walked on by rather than helping. We need to prove ourselves doers of the word as James 1:22 talks about, and not just hearers. Not just hearers. So as we close, the Samaritan certainly showed compassion to the injured traveler. It caused the Samaritan to be willing to cross barriers that existed, take risks. There could be robbers still along the road. Willingness to set aside busy schedules. The Samaritan was on his way somewhere, but took time to help and then take the guy to an inn. Willing to make sacrifices. It cost money. The Samaritan had to put up some money for that. This is what it's all about as we go about our lives. Individual lives as well as collectively our church lives. Jesus asked, or Jesus answered the lawyer basically with, everyone will be your neighbor. Everyone will be your neighbor. And that's what we've got to think about and we've got to do. We are challenged in this story. We are challenged to think about how we believe and what we believe. Why we believe what we believe. Does our thinking along the lines of answering the question, who is our neighbor, is that thinking along the lines that Jesus thinks? Is that how Jesus thinks? How would you answer Jesus if he asked you personally, who do you believe your neighbor is? How would you answer that? Many times I doubt whether the general populace would answer that question as Jesus answered it, because they would not include the people they hate. They would not include the people that's different from them. They would not include those who they had nothing in common with. You see, but Jesus' definition does include that. And that's what we've got to understand. Our last verse here, Matthew 5:20. Says, for I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. As God's children, we've got to think differently than everybody else. We've got to be different than everybody else. Our lives should reach out and help the world, because the world is our neighbor. If this morning you haven't been baptized for the remission of your sins, you haven't been added to the Lord's church by God himself, then we can assist you in that this morning. If, on the other hand, you have been a member of the church, but you have kind of wandered away, if you need to come back, we can assist you there as well. Let it be made known now while we stand and sing.